Alright guys, I was asked to do an installation into a Atlas motor. I picked the Dash 8, I think this is the Dash 8B, yep, Dash 8B from Atlas. It's actually a nice little motor. More into the Kato stuff, and I actually like a little older generation of diesel myself. But the unit that comes from Atlas is actually pretty nice, pretty nicely detailed. I do like all the work and that was put into it. So what today I'm going to do is I'm going to install a Digitrax SDN144A0 sound decoder into this motor. They call it a plug and play, but it's not really plug and play. You do have to do quite a bit of disassembly just to get the decoder in there. So far I've got a lot of Digitrax decoders. Actually all my decoders right now are Digitrax and they work pretty well. Doesn't seem to like to do a consist with my NCE Digitrax decoder system. In fact, my digital command control system. But other than that, it works pretty well. So the first thing we have to do is we have to take the shell off of the frame. And I saw a nifty little trick on YouTube. And basically all he did was he put the motor on the front of the motor right here on top of the plastic case. And then we just dropped it a few times. And comes right off. Works really well. Doesn't seem to do any kind of damage at all to the housing at all. So let's go with that. All right. So the first thing you're gonna notice is that you do have a light board right here, which is what we're gonna be replacing. In order to get the light board out, however, you do have to remove the screws, and of course we have to take off the fuel tank underneath here. So let's start with the fuel tank, which comes off easily enough. Put that over to the side there. So now we'll do is we'll start disassembly of the frame halves, and what I'm going to try to do is just trying to keep everything more or less together. One thing I will say though is that this is definitely lighter than the Kato units that I've got. So the other thing I'm going to say about the Kato units, one of the simplest mechanisms to take apart. Seems like the light board is pretty okay. Alright, so not the easiest thing to take apart, but there we go. We have our two motor halves. I always like to hold on to the LED light boards. You never know, you can always reuse the resistors and the LEDs that are in here. Alright, so there is our motor halves, which did not really come apart as easily as I'd like. Alright, and we got our tabs here for the motor, which we have to get on in between the light board right there. So what I'm probably going to do is I'm probably going to straighten these out, try to get the light board in there, and then slide the whole assembly back in. Now for this installation though, I am going to be using Aztec Manufacturing's milled frame, and normally you have to send him the frame, but he did me a solid and he actually sent me the frame ahead of time so I could take this thing apart. So what he does is you give him your frame, he mails it back to you. He's going to mill out for a speaker right there, and he's also going to, on the other side, mill out a small groove where you can actually fit the two 32mm wires in. Okay. So now we have to do is we have to take out all of this and transfer it all over into the new frame. Now what we're going to do is we're going to move this assembly onto the new half here. Before I do that though, I just want to make sure that I don't need to isolate anything here, so just take out the drive shaft. So I got my 2 drive shafts here. And let's go ahead and remove the actual electric motor from the okay. Alright, so now this does come pretty close to here. That actually should be fine, so I don't think we'll have any issues with that. There's a couple of other things you can do if you didn't want to go through the trouble of trying to figure out how you're going to squeeze this in. There we go. You could actually solder wires directly to them and go from there. I'd rather use the tab right here. I am actually going to put a little bit of flux on there, and I'm going to put a little bit of solder in there. Oh, looks like while I was manhandling, I disconnected the speaker there. So let's go ahead and try and get this back into the frame. There we go. Get the drive shaft back in there. Rotate your bushings, make sure they're in there nice. I'll grab the other one. Okay, so everything is in on this half. The connection seems solid, but I have noticed a lot of times that you'll have to solder these pads to the frame itself. I did have to do it with a couple with when I did the RDC. I'm sorry, the RS2 with the Kato unit. So these are pretty tiny. Okay. And we'll go ahead and try to get this frame half back on here. Alright, there we go. I don't know if anybody noticed before my camera cut off on me that I actually reassembled the other half using the stock frame. So I went ahead and I fixed that. The speaker finished coming off on me, so that doesn't matter anyway because the wires are actually not long enough to reach all the way up to the decoder. Just a hair short, which is not a big deal. So I went ahead, put the locking screws back in there. I'm going to reattach. Before I put the screws back in, I'm going to head and put the trucks back onto the frame. Just going to keep holding it nice and tight. I go ahead and drop the screw in there. Let's get that together. It's pretty much together there. Just gonna reassemble my screwdriver here. Good, that's nice and tight. Huh? And that's nice and tight. Alright, so now if you notice also the we're gonna end up having to resolder this. I think the red wire is long enough. The short part is actually gonna come on the black wire. And it's got, looks like it's got like a liquid electrical tape on here, so this will be fun trying to figure out how to solder a new wire onto here without getting it all sloppy, so we'll get to that later. So now we've got the decoder installed, and you can see it's got a little bit of play in it. So I got a feeling I will have to solder the tabs just to make sure I have good electrical contact. I'm definitely going to be soldering the tabs for the motor, which is kind of hard to tell, but they are right in the grooves. I think the easiest way is to try to put the decoder onto the motor first and then put it into the frame halves, just because you do kind of have to wiggle it around. I did take off the light strap before, so let's pick that up and get that back on there, nice and easy. Now, this is simple enough. Now you want to be careful that you don't Alright, so what I'm going to do here is just, there we go. Alright, so you can see it fits right in. Now there's a couple of things you can do if it's bothering you that this is bouncing around a little bit. I don't think it's going to actually be an issue anyway, but if you wanted to, you can put some kind of adhesive there. I just like using some 100% silicone. The only downside with this is that it does outgas for a little while before it becomes completely chemically neutral. So you would have to let it sit for probably, I'd say, a day before you finish the installation on it and everything. So that is the decoder installed. Now I'm going to figure out a way to get the wires on, and I'm going to put the wires on before I put in the copper strips that run power to everything. So I'm going to take the wire over here and then we'll get back to you. Alright, so I've gone ahead and soldered new wires to the speaker, and I ran it down the middle of the split of the frame, and I tucked it into the groove that John mills out for us at Aztec Manufacturing. And I did a little bit of a number, obviously. It was kind of manhandling the decoder, and I popped off both the wires. So I ended up having to attach a new red wire and a new black wire, because the black wire wasn't going to be long enough anyway. And what I did was just wrap the black wire around the back side of it, just see how that works out. Next, I reinstalled the spring contacts for the copper strips. So the next stop is going to be to go ahead and test what I've done, make sure that I didn't mess anything up when I was putting this back together again. I more than likely am going to have to solder the pads over here. Just got to be really careful when using the soldering iron around these parts, because you've got all these components right next to the tabs that make the contact. Although the board does feel pretty tight, so that may not be necessary. The spring tension is pretty good over here also. The only thing that worries me is right here. The contact strip gets very close to the frame. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little piece of Kapton tape, and I'm just going to put it right down the middle of right here, covering the copper tab here, just to make sure it doesn't get in contact with the frame. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'll set up my test track, and let's see what we're looking at. Alright, so I've gone ahead and gotten everything ready. I did have to put a little bit of solder right here on the motor tabs, just because it wasn't really getting a good electrical pickup. I would probably recommend, when doing the install initially, to actually solder them on as you go, or maybe you can just put a little drop of solder on each pad before you assemble it. It will make the connection much stronger. Like I said before, though, I did put a piece of Kapton tape right here wrapping around the frame, just to make sure that the motor tab does not come in contact and then short out the frame. So now let's hear what it sounds like. So you can hear the prime mover starting up. And the nice thing about the Digitrax controllers is the prime mover will actually speed up in tone and increase in volume as your speed builds up. Let's hear what some of the what the horn and the bell sound like. So first I'll do the horn. I'm sorry, the bell. It's pretty loud, pretty small speaker in a very confined space. Then we've got the horn. And the horn's okay. Yeah, we've got our headlight working, everything else. Alright, so that'll complete the test. I'm going to go ahead and put the shell back on the frame. Make sure that everything is still working. And let's see what happens. Alright, so with the capacitor in here, you need to remove a piece of the headlight lens on the inside. I just clipped off the end. Let's see if I put it on the tweezers here. So you can see the light bar, or the light travels through here into the headlight. There's still another piece there. You just gotta clip it off flush this way, because what happens is when this is inside of the cab, it's hanging down and it does get in the way of the capacitor. I don't know if you'll be able to see that. So I just removed it. Just cut it off with my rail clippers. Actually, I know, yeah, I'm supposed to only use it for rails, but whatever. So that went on perfect after that. No issues. The headlight works no problem. So let's see what it sounds like now with the shell on and everything on. Okay. Alright. Everything looks like it's working. Slow speed operation is great. And you can kind of hear the prime mover moving up in tempo a little bit, but it's pretty difficult. I don't really have a long enough test track set up for this thing yet, so but there you have it. That's the installation of the Digitrax SDN144A0 into an Atlas-8. There's a couple of other frames that that decoder fits into. It's actually specifically designed for the I think it was the GP38. With that one, Digitrax I guess recommends that it's got the fans right over here on the top that you can remove and install some BLM fans instead, which requires then you to modify the body, paint work, everything else. You're not that good with paint. I'm not. And actually, my preferred method is to install into the frame anyway. Just a lot less headache. I can keep the locomotive looking stock on the outside, so nobody can tell I did anything to this. And there you have it. Now I just want everybody to know that this was the first time I've ever installed this decoder, and you got to watch me do it and learn as I figured it out. You can see, even though it was my first time, it really wasn't that difficult. And thanks to Aztec Manufacturing's milled out frame for the speaker, everything went nice and smooth. The only catch was I did have to make the wires longer so that the speaker could fit in the gas tank instead of on top here, because obviously if I put it on top here, there's no way you'd even be able to hear anything. So now it's underneath the loco, right beneath where the motor would normally be anyway, so it gives it a more realistic sound. It's coming out from the right area. Really nice, easy install for the most part. Just that one little caveat of making the speaker wires longer, but other than that, pretty easy. I hope somebody picks something up by watching this, and hope you enjoy model railroading. Thank you.